dream, the true American dream. You want to start the morning off right, have a sweet, sweet cup of Dinesh, because he was born in Mumbai, India, came to America on a scholarship, got admitted to Dartmouth, then worked in the Reagan administration, then went to work as one of the most influential policymakers in the country. But what he's really well known for are his films. His documentaries are some of the highest grossing and most successful documentaries, political documentaries in American history. He has a new one out right now, and we're going to play that trailer. Guys, are we ready?
Oh, I love it. It was so good. It was so good.
Lincoln was elected to unite a country and stop slavery. Democrats sneered him, went to war against him, assassinated him. Now, their target is Trump.
Donald Trump wins the presidency. So help me God.
They say he's a racist.
This was a white lash
and a fascist. Who are the real racists?
Northern Democrats had conspired together with Southern Democrats to take away the fruit of other people's labor.
Who are the real fascists?
Both Mussolini and Hitler set up and ran welfare states.
This is done by the do-gooders, the liberals, the people who wanted to improve society.
Which party attacks our free speech?
How dare you speak against the law?
Our religious liberty and our personal safety. A nation dies when its people are not free. We too must fight for freedom, regardless of the price we pay.
An end in terror is preferable to a terror with no end.
The stakes could not be higher. We're talking about America, the greatest nation on earth. Lincoln saved America for the first time. It's now up to us to save America a second time.
Dinesh D'souza!
Wow. I am really excited to be here. I didn't quite expect this transparent podium. I'm kind of relieved I remembered to wear pants. What a great crowd. I'm very honored and thrilled to be opening this conference. I don't know if you realize it, but we're living at a crazy, abnormal time in American politics. It's not entirely a good thing, but it is the America that we live in now. People talk a lot about how our country is so divided, and there is so much incivility and almost savagery in politics. And it's true. And the left likes to point the finger at Trump. He's responsible for this division. He's responsible for this mean tone. But I think we know that Trump didn't create this division. It created him.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how we got Trump.
Woo! Yeah.
For a long time, it was customary for Republicans to nominate what you could call the head Boy Scout to be our candidate. And so we tried it. Bob Dole, John McCain, Mitt Romney. Nice guys. But, and in fact, with squeaky clean resumes, If I had to write a college recommendation for Mitt Romney, it would read something like, "Not since Jesus Christ." a very clean-cut character indeed. But the moment Mitt Romney stepped on the public stage, within 15 minutes the left was able to turn him into Lucifer. Up against the wall, on the defensive. How did you make so much money? You're greedy, you're selfish, you're ripping off the American worker. Where'd you get $200 million? And then the conventional Republican response is to be apologetic, explanatory, defensive. You notice that people don't even try this with Trump. They never say, Trump has actually more money than Romney, but there's no point saying, where did you get $1 billion? Because if you do that, Trump will sit you down and explain to you that he has a lot more money than you thought. So this kind of strategy doesn't really work. I don't think that the big problem in American politics is division so much as it is the gangsterization of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
That has happened, and I got, with my own case, a little first-hand window into what that looks like. It's really opened my eyes, and now when I see things with Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort and Flynn, I know what's going on behind the closed door. In my own case, I'm sitting across from the virtually unlimited power, by the way, of the federal prosecutors, really of the U.S. government. And they will say, in effect, to me something like, Mr. D'Souza, did you exceed the campaign finance law? And I say, inadvertently I did, and I should receive the same penalty as anybody else who did the same thing.
No.
And this is when they say, not so fast. And then they say things like, we're going to get you on mail fraud. And I say, mail fraud? They go, yeah, because you put your check in the mail. I go, wow. I said, we're going to get you on bank fraud. And I say, bank fraud? They go, yeah, because you took your money out of your bank account. I go, wow. And then I realize what's going on. They're taking what you did, re-describing it 4 different ways, dropping a federal charge on each one. See, they have a huge accordion-like bag of federal statutes, so they can literally pluck them out at will. And they're using statutes that were put into place to fight ISIS and the mafia. You can't get Al Capone, so let's get him on a technicality. These laws are now turned around and used against American dissidents and American citizens. Fortunately for me, my story had a happy ending. This happened about 6 months ago. I was sitting in my office, and the phone rang. I pick it up. It's the White House operator. Is this Mr. Dinesh D'souza? Yes, it is. Hold the line for the President of the United States. Wow. It's Trump. And he was in a very Trumpian mood. Hey, Dinesh, how's it going? I'm sitting here right here with John Kelly. You know John Kelly, don't you? I'm like, I don't know John Kelly. I know who he is, but I don't actually know the guy. And then Trump gets right down to the matter at hand. He goes, I gotta tell you, buddy, you got screwed. And what's great is that he talks, and he's talking about my case. But it's even hard for me to really listen, because what's passing through my mind is, wow, I'm actually not only going to get my rights back, I can now vote again, I can own a gun, I'm getting my American dream back. But even more than that, I know that the political significance is even bigger, because this is one giant up yours to the Obama administration. Now, different situations involve different types of leadership. When Abraham Lincoln came to Washington, he had the reputation, and he was, a very moderate man. Selected actually from, you might say, the moderate wing of the Republican Party. But nevertheless, Lincoln knew that in the 1850s, the political situation had deteriorated and the Democrats had gone nuts. You had incidents like a Democratic congressman taking out a cane and beating to a pulp a Republican senator in his office. This was not normal politics, and Lincoln recognized that it's going to require an abnormal type of response. I say this because I myself am a product of the Reagan era, and the Reagan era was a more cordial time. Reagan, in a sense, could engage in, you might almost say, friendly banter with the other side. In those days, now we have Jim Acosta.
Boo! Fake news!
Does that guy resemble an overgrown fetus?
Got him.
Anyway, the Jim Acosta of the 1980s was Sam Donaldson of ABC News. And Sam Donaldson would corner Reagan, and I remember in 1982, this was the teeth of a really bad recession, and Sam Donaldson says, "Mr. Reagan, in your speech, you have blamed the Democrats, you have blamed the economists, and you have blamed the media. Does any of the blame belong to you?" And Reagan goes, "Well, yes, because for many years I used to be a Democrat." Now, if you look at this little clip and play it, you'll notice that actually Sam starts laughing as well. He kind of knows that Reagan got him. And it was that kind of a time in which a Reagan and a Tip O'Neill could disagree and vehemently, but kind of go out for a Guinness afterward. That's not today's America. I think if Reagan were alive now, he would be a little discombobulated, a little disheartened. He would be a little bit of a fish out of water.
Kind of like
why? Because the waters are a little too roiled right now. But the guy who would not be a fish out of water, would be completely at home, would be Lincoln. Because, as I hinted a moment ago, the waters were even more roiled in 1860. And to give you an idea of the kind of severity to which Lincoln actually became habituated, early in the Civil War, it came to the attention of Lincoln that the Confederacy had adopted a policy of executing captured black soldiers. In other words, black soldiers for the Union were summarily shot, whereas white soldiers who were captured were simply prisoners of war. And when Lincoln heard this, he issued an executive order that is, to my mind, perhaps the most barbaric to come out of the northern side. For every black Union soldier killed by the Confederacy, one Confederate soldier will be shot. Now, what would cause a moderate man to issue an order of such evident barbarity? The answer is really simple. Lincoln basically felt there is no way to make the other side stop unless we do to them what they're doing to us. We gotta do it. We gotta do it.
Woo!
And it makes me think, because in other forms, this kind of thing is going on today. When Antifa is marauding the campus, threatening speakers, intimidating people coming to lectures, causing events to be canceled. By and large, if they get the event canceled, they mark it off as a victory. They won. And so we have to figure out ways not to let them win in that way. Now, in politics today, we focus quite a bit on fake news. In my own work, I try to focus on fake narratives. fake history. Not so much stories as meta-stories, the story behind the story. Because ultimately what's happened is that the left has been really successful in embedding fake narratives into our culture. And you can only do this if you're really dominant, not only in academia, but also in the media and the entire entertainment industry, which includes Hollywood and Broadway and the music industry and most of the comedians. If you have all that, you can actually put out, with relative impunity, a whole bunch of big lies. And it puts me in a very odd situation, both in my books and movies, because when I'll go speak on campus. And I literally am encountering students and professors on the left who know things that flatly aren't true. And this raises a sort of puzzle for me, which is, first of all, psychologically, how do people, intelligent people, get to know something that isn't true? How does that process even work? Well, the way it works is something like this. A professor at some university, let's say Tulane, publishes a book in order to try to claim fascism is on the right. Fascism is a right-wing phenomenon. And then his colleagues, who are on the same ideological camp, they go, oh, this was a very insightful book, path-breaking, really changes the debate. And then there's a review in the New York Review of Books in the New York Times 2 days later. The guy's interviewed on NPR. Pretty soon, Michael Moore comes rolling in to do a documentary.
Yeah, with his fat ass.
Steven Spielberg decides to convert the story into a movie. And then it's on Wikipedia, and it's up on the History Channel. So think about it. If I were to ask some guy, how do you know that fascism is on the right? He'll say, well, wow, there I was in Barnes & Noble, and I saw a book about it, and then my professor said something about it, and it was on the History Channel, I heard it on NPR, I typed into Wikipedia, boom, there it was, so that's how I know. Now, this guy doesn't quite realize that what he's experiencing is the same bullet ricocheting from one wall onto the other and coming at him from different directions, but to him or to her, it's confirmation that this must be true because he's seen it here and there and everywhere. And this is kind of what we're up against. I think to our detriment, we have allowed these large megaphones of the culture to become almost completely dominated by the other side. Now, in reality, anyone who looks into fascism with even the slightest degree of care can see that fascism emerged completely from the left. Fascism emerged out of something called the crisis of Marxism. The crisis of Marxism was that in the 19th century, Marx had predicted that proletarian revolutions led by workers would break out in all the industrialized countries. But in fact, proletarian revolutions led by workers broke out in no industrialized country. And in fact, a genuine workers' revolt has never occurred in any country anywhere in the world to this date. So the Marxists of the early 20th century knew that this Marxist prediction was flat wrong, completely wrong. And they thought that Marxism had to be fundamentally revised to bring it into line with reality. And so, a group of Marxists, led by Benito Mussolini, the leading Marxist along with Gramsci in Italy and the editor of the Socialist magazine there, had an idea. He said that Marxists assume that people are loyal to their own class. Workers of the world unite. A working man in France has more in common with a working man in Germany than he does with his own fellow Frenchman or German. But Mussolini said, when I fought in World War I, I noticed the opposite. I noticed that the French socialists fought for France, and the German socialists fought for Germany. In other words, nationalism is a very powerful force. People are attached to their own country. So Mussolini said, we need a new type of socialism that marries nationalism with socialism. That marriage came to be called fascism. And in every country in Europe, there were fascist parties in about 6 countries. All the fascists in all the countries were, without exception, men of the left. To take the single example of France, the founder of French fascism was Jean Alleman, French socialist, veteran of the Dreyfus case. The other leader of French fascism was Jacques Doriot, the leader of the French Communist Party. And Marcel Dia, another a prominent French leftist and socialist. In Italy, Mussolini's main deputy was a guy named Nicola Bombacci, the co-founder of the Italian Communist Party and a friend of Engels. So this is the actual soil out of which fascism grew. Now, remarkably, all of this has been suppressed. And by that I mean it isn't taught, it isn't reported, educated people don't know it. Why? Because later, after World War II, when fascism came into bitter disrepute, when it became synonymous with evil, the progressives basically realized, whoa, if young people in the future, you guys, learn the actual history of fascism, we're finished. Because fascism has been in bed with the left for decades. So let's clean this up. Let's not so much lie as just leave a bunch of stuff out. Let's remove facts that are inconvenient to the left and the Democratic Party and simply not talk about them. Let's hope that the conservatives are so dumb that they'll never find out about them, because none of them wants to do any original research. Leave it to us. We'll manage this. And this big lie has been going on not only with fascism, but I think even more stunningly with racism. Lincoln was completely onto this, by the way. Lincoln knew that the problem with slavery was not a problem of the South, but a problem of the Democratic Party. And the reason we know that Lincoln knew this is that Lincoln actually talked about what he called the 4 bad guys of slavery, the 4, you may say, horsemen of the apocalypse. And of the 4, only one was a Southerner. That was Roger Taney, the guy who wrote the Dred Scott decision. But all the other 3, the former president, Franklin Pierce, from New Hampshire, the sitting president, James Buchanan, from Pennsylvania, and then Lincoln's own rival, Stephen Douglas, from Illinois, all Northern Democrats. So the Northern Democrats were in bed with the Southern Democrats protecting slavery. And the reason that the left today is rampaging the South and knocking down Confederate statues is precisely to promote the big lie that the South should take the blame. In other words, what the Democrats are doing is moving the blame for what they did to the South. Very bad. The ordinary Confederate soldier was a dirt poor laborer or farmer, did not own slaves. Pulling down that guy's statue, is that guy the bad guy of American history? No, no. When I speak on campus and I talk about the role of the Democratic Party in slavery, inevitably the following happens. Some professor of Romance languages at Bowdoin College will stand up. He'll go, Mr. D'Souza, your talk is very simplistic. You have put the blame entirely on the Democratic Party. Surely you, as an educated man, know there is plenty of blame to go around. This is the progressive defense, an attempt to sort of smudge the issue, to release what I call a squid-like cloud of rhetoric and obfuscation. This is going to happen to you. And it's really important at this point to have that kind of killer javelin that's going to completely puncture through this squid-like cloud of obfuscation. So that's the time for me to say something like this. Well, actually, there is not plenty of blame to go around. In fact, in 1860, which was the year before the Civil War, no Republican owned a slave.
Yep.
Notice, I'm not saying no Republican leader owned a slave. I'm saying that no Republican in the United States owned a slave. And that means that all the slaves in the entire country, 4 million of them, were owned by Democrats. Now, these are fighting words. In fact, they sort of remind me of an atheist who read the Bible from cover to cover for the first time and upon reaching the end wrote a single note in the margin, important if true. Important if true. And that applies to my statement, important if true. And the beauty of the statement is it's not some kind of a dogmatic statement, it's a scientific statement open to refutation. All you have to do is give me the name of one Republican who owned a slave, and I would have to take it back. But to this date, as I stand here, more than 2 years since I initially made this statement, not a single valid counterexample has surfaced. A few months ago, a guy from the University of Michigan, a demographer, writes me, goes, Dinesh, I think I got you. He goes, Ulysses S. Grant owned a single slave that he inherited on his wife's side. And I replied saying, the facts are true as you state, but you actually don't get to win the argument because at the time that this happened, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat.
Got him.
He became a Republican later. The final strategy for the left on this race business, once you force them to admit that the Democrats are not just the party of slavery, but the party of segregation and Jim Crow and racial terrorism and the Ku Klux Klan, and all their nonsense about David Duke is an effort to camouflage attention from the fact that if you actually made a list of all the Ku Klux Klan leaders from the 1860s to now, well over 90% of them would be in the D column and not in the R column. That's the fact. And the solitary exception of Duke is intended to draw attention away from that fact and convert the exception into a bogus rule. Yeah. Once you do all that, you come back with the left's only salvation is the notion that the parties switch sides. Yeah. The Republicans became Democrats, and the Democrats sort of became Republicans. And Nixon's Southern strategy is said to be the lever that produced this momentous shift. In other words, Nixon appealed to the racist vote in the South, and blacks, recognizing this, blacks who were once Republican, fled to the Democratic Party because they realized that Democrats are now their friends on civil rights. This idea is so powerful and so widely taught. I'm not aware of a single conservative book refuting it, even challenging it at a fundamental level. And yet, it is flatly and manifestly untrue. For example, it is true that blacks who used to be Republicans are today mostly Democrats. But this change did not occur in the 1960s, or the 70s, or the 80s, or the 90s. It in fact occurred in the 1930s. When Herbert Hoover ran against FDR in 1932, Hoover got 3 out of 4 black votes. In 1936, when FDR ran for re-election, FDR got 3 out of 4 black votes. So the black switch occurred in 4 years, in the 30s, and had nothing to do with race. In fact, the Democratic Party at the time was obviously the party of segregation and the KKK. So why would African Americans leave the party of Lincoln and emancipation and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and become Democrats? And the answer? The extreme hardships of the Great Depression, the crumbs, and they were crumbs, offered by the New Deal. It was economic benefit, not civil rights, that is responsible for blacks moving from the GOP to the Democratic Party. And that can be checked out, and that is undisputed. That's when the switch occurred. Now, the other switch, when did the South, traditionally Democratic, move into the Republican camp? This requires a moment of attention because it is widely assumed that the South moved into the Republican camp because of resistance to civil rights. But the truth of the matter is that the South begins to move into the Republican camp in the 1940s and 50s. Eisenhower wins a whole bunch of southern states. Interestingly, Richard Nixon campaigns not in the Deep South, which he loses to Wallace, the Democratic segregationist. Nixon campaigns in what he considers to be the upper or peripheral South. He campaigns in cities, Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Dallas, all the way to California. Nixon's strategy is a Sun Belt strategy. He notices that people are moving into the South from northern states. Nixon, in other words, is after the non-racist vote in the South. And Nixon realizes that racism is declining. And so there are more votes for Republicans to win in the South. As the South is becoming less racist, it's becoming more Republican. And the racist Dixiecrats, I think I've now proved this definitively, lived and died in the Democratic Party. With one exception in the Senate, Strom Thurmond, and one in the House, Albert Watson, every other racist Dixiecrat remained a Democrat. This is not even debatable. And in fact, the reason we know we win this argument hands down is that the guys who debate me, like the Princeton historian Kevin Cruz, he gives examples of people who were Democrats and became Republicans who are not Dixiecrats. He goes, well, what about Jesse Helms? What about Trent Lott? What about John Tower of Texas? What about Strong? And my point is, those guys are not Dixiecrats. So this is a big lie, but not an ordinary big lie. It's a big lie of deep significance because it ultimately lets the Democrats, if we let them get away with it, then we let the Democrats, the very people who poisoned the waters, show up pretending to be the water commissioner. The very people who did all the crimes of slavery and segregation and racial terrorism get to take the terrible legacy that they did and pin it on us. This is how people can get away with saying things like, well, Donald Trump has the support of the KKK and neo-Nazis. By the way, this assertion, which started with Charlottesville, went unchallenged for over a year, as if it's obviously true. It's obviously not true. There is not 1 ounce of empirical data. No one has ever done a survey of neo-Nazis or skinheads or members of the Klan that shows that a majority of them, or even a minority of them, voted for Trump. There's no evidence of this anywhere. What does it rely on? It relies solely on images from Charlottesville, where you have ultimately about 4 guys wearing Trump hats. There we go, that's the evidence. In no sane society would this kind of pictorial nonsense substitute for evidence or data. And again, the reason the left pushes is they rely on their dominance in media and on our stupidity, our unwillingness to confront them and demand that they prove it. And our expose. See, it was known when the Charlottesville rally occurred 2 years ago that the organizer of it, Jason Kessler, was an Obama guy and Occupy Wall Street guy. In other words, you have an apparent Obama activist posing as a white supremacist. This makes no sense. And yet the media, which knew this, suppressed it. They said, let's not report on it. Let's not mention it. Why not? It ruins our narrative. Our narrative is that white nationalism is on the right. And this, by the way, is why in the movie Death of a Nation, I said, okay, I'm gonna get Richard Spencer, the poster boy of white supremacy, and talk to him about what he believes. And watching that interview is really interesting. It actually shows you the power of film, because if I interviewed him and taped it and put it in a book, you'd read it and you'd go, wow, this is interesting. But in the film, it's much more impactful because you've been hearing that this guy is the spokesman of white nationalism. You see him, he sits right across from me, and then I ask him questions. It becomes blindingly obvious that this guy is not on the right. He does not agree with Trump on anything, not even on immigration. He doesn't agree with the founders. I mean, if we are conservatives in any meaningful sense of the word, we conserve the principles of the American founding. That's what it means to be a conservative. So the whole notion that the white nationalists are on the right, fake history, fake news. Now, the reason I'm encouraged is I think that there is a great waking up that is occurring in America. You're part of it. It's occurring even in minority communities, not just in the black community, but also among Latinos.
Woo!
My wife grew up in the barrios of South Texas. We were down there for an event, and someone said, I own a billboard company, I'll give you a billboard. We put up a billboard, 1,000 people, all Hispanics. And I want to conclude with my message to that group, because in a sense they were asking me, what's the difference between the two parties? What do they at the end of the day stand for? And these are people who don't know, and they don't know because our message doesn't get down there, our people don't go down there, and the Democratic candidate for Congress does not even run a campaign. He doesn't need to campaign, he wins automatically. The Republican always campaigns and loses. So I said, look, I'm an immigrant, I'm an outsider, and as I look at America, I see two parties. One is, I would say, the party of the ladder. And by the ladder, what I mean is ladders of opportunity. The government, in this view, does have a job. The government's job is, in effect, to hold the ladder, by which I mean to protect our basic rights. But other than that, it's our job to climb.
Yes.
That's what it means to be free. You climb the ladder, and where you get on the ladder is the result of your effort. And your ingenuity and your persistence and chance. But there is another approach, a rival approach, which I think defines the Democratic Party now, and that is, I would call it the politics of the rope. And the politics of the rope looks like this. You have all the poor people and the immigrants down here, and the Democrats are on top of a tall building. And they say, you lowly poor people and immigrants, we have some assistance for you. We're going to let down a rope, but we want you to hold on, and we will pull you up. Now, frankly, on the first glance, this is very tempting. Why? Because it's easier to hold on to a rope than to actually climb a ladder. It seems like you have to do less. But after a while, you begin to realize, wait a minute, I'm totally dependent on the people who hold the rope. Quite frankly, if they let go, down I go. And then you notice something that's even more troubling, which is that not very many people supposedly being pulled up ever seem to get to the top of the building.
Yes.
Democrats pull and hold. In other words, there seems to be a stake in keeping people in a suspended